specific firearms. They are not talking capacity for magazines. They're talking databases, making sure what we have gives us the tools we need to deny a permit if we need to deny a permit. And that is basically where the sheriff's stance is on it. That's my stance on it. I am committed to public safety in Wright County. I'm fully aware of what's going on throughout the nation and other places, but my responsibility is here, and that's where I'm at with it. Any questions so far? I hear there's a meeting tonight down at the Capitol too. Yeah, I talked to one fellow who was heading down. Go ahead.
Do you think the role of the sheriff has been changing in the last number of years? I mean, because we see some activists, like maybe in Pine County, that say that they're not going to enforce any kind of executive order. Do you think that, and especially like down in Arizona, you see Sheriff Joe Arpaio taking his own stances on things. Do you see that happening here? If our constitutional rights across the board are, maybe subverted by socialist or communist intervention?
There's another Sheriff Joe? And we follow him. We don't. I don't have inmates wearing pink underwear. And in Minnesota, I'd probably be in trouble if I had them living in tents. He's got some other issues there. The immigration issue is huge there, much more than it is in Wright County. He's right along the border, of course. But that's a good question. I think there's some sheriffs that I don't know what happened. I researched most of these people just to see what happened. Was there something that was a split? We consider ourselves in Minnesota fairly mainstream. We're all, we may not be members of the official Oath Keeper group that stemmed probably about in 2009 when a lot of groups have. But, as far as the amendments go to the U.S. Constitution, yeah, I've sent out my election certificate at least 3 times since the 14th of December. People wanting to know, did you take an oath to uphold the Second Amendment? I said, yeah, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the state of Minnesota, and I take it seriously. I also understand that the Supreme Court, the 3 branches of government here, it's supposed to be our checks and balance, that they will interpret these in times of turmoil when there's 2 different ways to look at certain amendments. The Second Amendment, pretty clear, right to bear arms. And we take that serious. We also work with the Fourth Amendment, probably more so than any of them, to be secure in your own persons, in your home. Search and seizure. We'll get maybe city officials or neighbors saying, hey, they're growing dope in the house, kick the door in and go get it. And it's like, I'm going to need a little more than that. And I do. I go in, boom, we'll be sued like right now. So there's rules, and the rules are good if to restrict me from abusing power. And we are all for that. My predecessors were that way. Gary Miller, when I was a night sergeant, I worked 20 years. I love working the meth, the drugs. That was my deal, because if I can get a meth dealer or user off the street, I can help the user, because they're not much different than I. They made a wrong turn someplace, and all of a sudden that drug got them and just sucked them in. They were stealing from their families. Families would maybe think we were the devil, that, geez, you're picking on my kid all the time. Then the family got sick of them, stealing from them, writing checks on their accounts, and next thing it's like, hey, you got to help us. And it's like, yep, and sometimes it's tough love, and that's with anybody with a substance abuse. Giving them a break sometimes isn't the way to go, and we know that that's quite the root of evil with some of those. But the search and seizure, the laws are in place to protect citizens, and we are all for that. We have the media here today, First Amendment. We have freedom of the press and freedom of free speech. You think I like holding this thing for KRWC? Of course I do. But I hope that answers your question somewhat. I've been getting that question a lot, and I give it an honest answer. Yeah.
Yeah, on the same question, isn't it true that within your county, you're the ultimate law enforcement authority?
Everywhere but at home.
Well, yeah, I can say that. that includes the feds or whatever in your
Right.
county you're.
Right, the sheriff is considered the chief law enforcement officer of the county. You might have a county attorney that may want to argue that with you a little bit. You had a question, sir?
Do you feel that the people that are getting these concealed carry permits are proficient enough to handle guns safely? I get a little bit concerned. There's a lot of people, it's the first time they've ever shot a gun and they really don't know how to handle them. I'd be terrible handling a golf club, for instance, you know. But I get concerned that they could have an accident, you know.
You know, then I go back to our audit every year. Have we had any, you know, crimes? One, you can have an accident without having a crime. We did have one permit holder, probably 2 years ago, was in an establishment in the county here, and I don't know how he was carrying his gun. It was a smaller handgun, and I don't know what type of a holster it had, but when he left, it was sitting in a booth. And that's an oops, you bet, that's an oops. So, you know, I'm not 100% sure what we did with that. I know I had a conversation. I think I called the person in, and it was in a city that has their own police department, so we weren't the primary responders. But because I issued the permit, we can revoke the permit, and sometimes you might do that for a year. Was there any intent at all? Absolutely not. We had a cop years ago. I've been working with the sheriff's office since 1985, and years ago we had a cop come into the old sheriff's office, and the gun was missing, the holster was there, and you know, we asked the deputy, "Are you missing something?" "I don't think so," you know, holding everything, and it's like, shoot, left the gun in the bathroom. At a city hall that was locked, no access to the public. Yes, sir.
First of all, thanks for your service to our county.
Thank you.
Question for you, very similar to the first gentleman's question, just a little more pointed, and bear with me, I'll give you just 15 seconds of background here. There's an organization that Richard Mack, a former sheriff in Arizona, runs called, I think it's called CISPA, Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. Basically, they stand for, they assist and help sheriffs that are currently in service to stand for their constitutional rights and the constitutional rights of their citizens. They meet semi-annually, and several of those sheriffs have made statements, and have actually been through this, where federal agents or the federal government has tried to violate citizens' rights, be it the Fourth Amendment, the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, and they've had conflicts with those agents to where they've had to tell them, you need to leave our county, you can't do this, this is unconstitutional. Should it ever get to that, be it small, something like one home, the Fourth Amendment, something big like magazine capacity and infringing on the Second Amendment, if that was to happen here in our county, what would be your response if federal agents came in to enforce those laws?
Mike, you might want to move from that door here. That's a good question. I mentioned Sheriff Mack earlier, and that is the Constitutional Sheriff's Organization, and they meet yearly. They have a national conference. Last year they had it out in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I don't have any specific data on blocking federal agents, you know, access to a county. We have in Wright County, again, just in Wright County, I have a real good relationship with our federal partners. We have a heroin issue in Wright County. I never thought we did up until a year ago. Heroin was big in the 70s when I and Joe were growing up, and you only knew a few people that had it. It was a devastating drug. We took 2 pounds of heroin off somebody recently with the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and we'll work as partners with them. I'm one of 2 counties that has a nuclear power plant. With that comes some daunting responsibilities. With the safeguards agreement, I'm the primary response should something happen there. Of course, they have a large contingent of security there too. I can't tell you how many, but it works pretty good. So I work with the the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and we're up there on training and whatnot with them. The FBI is the holder of our data. They keep all the Part 1, Part 2 crimes. But with the constitutional sheriffs, I don't know if we have any in Minnesota, but some of the issues, a lot of those sheriffs were from the southern states and out west, Utah. I think Mac was up in Utah for a while too. But
Pine County.
Well, and I don't know if the Pine County Sheriff is actually a member or not. That's Sheriff Robin Coles. He's new like me to being a sheriff. I've only been a sheriff for 2 years, so bear with me, I am still learning, believe me. And I like learning about it, but I think he had sent a letter, and I've never met the man, I just read what everybody read in the paper, and I think he had sent a letter to his permit carry holders, I may be wrong, just mentioning something about if any federal legislation is passed. Number one, we rarely enforce federal legislation. Usually federal officers do that. Federal courts are down in Minneapolis, St. Paul, I don't know if there's one in Duluth, but even our county attorney probably wouldn't have much jurisdiction there. And other than drugs and maybe some finance type things that the federal government would get in, we don't have them here a lot for those type of things. But I don't know if that sheriff is actually a member. Most of it's down south and it is out west.
And I guess I didn't mean that to be a red herring to bring up that organization, but in the event that would ever take place in our county, in any way, shape, or form with any of the amendments, what would be your response?
Well, I don't want to take a guess at what might happen. I honestly cannot answer that. I don't know. I'd have to have a situation in front of me. Again, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and I hope that's enough for you tonight because you're bigger than me.
I have a question. Part of my career was going to school, and I found it very easy over the last 2 years to enter a school and have access. The only thing I see in some schools is police report to the principal's office as you enter. And I, being an ex-educator, I have a question and concern about what your role is in helping the school. And the other part of the question, what do you feel about teachers or somebody in the school carrying a gun?
The schools, we've done a good job, I think, in our schools. Every school has their own dynamic. We've got down in Delano, they passed a referendum a few years ago and they built a community center under their building. So you see a lot of senior citizens, a lot of families coming in to use the track and other things during the school day. So how do you tell your taxpayers or your residents, hey, you can't use the building? People like those schools used. But one way, again, is the partnerships. Make sure you're greeting people. There's a reason Walmart had greeters for years. Not that they were just overly friendly and wanted to welcome everybody in, but you weren't anonymous when you walked in. When you walked in, somebody greeted you, hey, how you doing? It's like, darn, I was here to steal lithium batteries for my meth lab tonight. And now they know who I am, I'm on camera, and it probably won't happen. As far as armed teachers go, I read an interesting article, and I think the Star Tribune it was in, right after Sandy Hook Elementary, when I think Representative Cornish, and maybe he's introducing a bill on just that, allowing school, and I think you already can if the superintendent is on board with you, if that's correct. Principal from up north said he carried for years, retired principal, and he said his superintendent knew he carried. He said law enforcement was 20 minutes away. That'd be about the closest response time, so he just felt comfortable doing it. Probably a personal decision, but it's up to the school district. You know, it's going to be really an individual decision. Who can handle a firearm? You know, a gentleman here asked, are you proficient in it? And when you're dealing with younger people, high school students or middle school students, and they're out of control, they're emotional, and maybe the teacher is handling them, and now that, you know, ours is in a pretty secure holster here. A lot of holsters people carry wouldn't be this big. It'd probably be something on the inside of a belt. Maybe it's like the fella at the establishment where the gun falls out, and now you have an emotional kid that maybe gets a gun. That would be my concern. But it would be, you know, where's the school district at? What does the community want? But currently it can, in my understanding, if the superintendent says you can. We had one principal in one of the schools, safe schools, he asked me after a safe schools meeting, what do you think if I carry a gun? And this person happens to have a permit, is my understanding. And the permits, it's private data. We've been getting calls asking does so-and-so have a permit, does so-and-so have a permit. We will never say, we tell them,